Ways of the Isle. Upon our vessel's arrival on the shore of the far-flung island of Shizana, we were greeted by nothing but a desolate stretch of bone-white sand reaching as far as the eye could see in either direction. There were no warm welcomes uttered by parties of kindly enlightened natives, as I had so expected and dearly hoped for. No crustaceans crawled its barren surface, and no birds flew overhead. Even the wind which had so violently shook us to the point of near disaster, not but an hour before, refused to make its presence known. I signaled to the small crew that this was perfectly typical in such an obscure land, but in truth, my mouth lay agape just as theirs was, although I did a decent enough job of hiding it from them. My previous investigations, spanning those last 4 excruciating years, had finally led me there to the hidden Shizana Isle, accessible only through an extremely precise trajectory, an anomalous route, nestled deep in the tempestuous bosom of the North Atlantic, traversable only during the most unforgiving of storms. After several failed voyages, squandering most of my inheritance, several good seamen's lives, and nearly perishing more than once myself. As a result, I was ecstatic to have finally reached what I wished so dearly to be those fabled lands, thought in legend to contain a people who are said to have transcended death itself. And yet, our immediate surroundings inspired little but dread within me. I assumed defeating death would produce a lush landscape of thriving life, existing blissfully and in perfect natural harmony. However, all we could see for miles and endless miles inland was naught but a wasteland of scraggly brownish-yellow grass and scant groupings of leafless, jagged trees beneath a gloomy sky. The land itself seemed to go onwards towards infinity, stretching into a vast, misty steppe with no visible end in sight. I hoped with all my heart that I had not once again been mistaken in my calculations, as another failure would surely have left me all but destitute once I found myself back on familiar, civilized soil. I beckoned the weary sailors forth after helping to gather supplies for the journey, of which I had no idea how long it may take, and we all lugged what we could onto the nondescript swathe of nothing grass before us. It crumbled beneath our boot heels, disintegrating into ash. As such, markers that would lead us back to our ship proved entirely unnecessary, and a portion of our firewood load was abandoned along the way due to the evenness of the still, temperate climate. The footsteps we left behind, scorched black as if our souls were ablaze, proved to be all the more distinguishable even from a distance. The land's unpredicted peculiarities disturbed me. I knew that I mustn't let the others know how truly out of my depth I really was, lest they lose faith in my expertise and turn mutinous. They were here somewhere, and we would find them, learn their secrets, so that the whole world might benefit from such great knowledge. Oh, how naive I was. We walked for an incalculably long stretch of time, each man leaving his trail of jet-black boot prints behind him, burned into the death beneath. The air wavered and sparked on the peripherals of my vision, sending me into an anxious spiral of self-doubt. Indeed, this place was clearly at least preternatural. Its lifeless composition chomped at the nerves and made one sick with the desperate urge to flee. An urge, it was clear, which affected each of us present. Flee, however, we did not. We pushed onward as a group, and while no real words were exchanged from the moment we stepped foot onto the shore, it was as if each man knew, all to himself, of the significance of this endeavor, that we were on the cusp of something previously seen by very few before us. To my sudden delight, I spotted a rather striking swath of vibrant purple cresting a hill on the otherwise flat landscape. My words failed to bring themselves to fruition, falling into nothingness beyond my lips. And yet my intent translated through some other unknown means, and the crew's attention was drawn collectively towards the object of my pointing finger. The others apparently couldn't speak either, but as if of one mind, we changed course and headed towards the small hill. Still living flowers akin to strange alien bluebells were the source of the color, the only such splash apparently left in all the land, and I implored the men wordlessly not to touch them. None did, struck with the sort of reverence that one feels when face to face with the only modicum of thriving life in a sea of decay. Pacing ever so carefully through the flowers underfoot, urging the group to stay at the bottom so as to not disturb the flora more than need be, I climbed the hill, taking all of a minute. At the top I felt higher than God himself. I saw my effort repaid tenfold before my eyes. The natives, the legendary Shintak people, sat at least 100 in number in neat, awaiting rows staring me dead from down below, all of a similar basic height and complexion and garbed in identical flowing brown robes, all fixed with the same stoic, emotionless expression. Behind them lay their surprisingly crude settlement. Wooden shacks adorned a massively large arrangement of concentric circles constructed using black and white rocks, the design inherently primitive, but the scene emanated a strange but very clear power just the same, as if the building served not only as living space, but as part of some grand occult display as well. I could tell that these people were also completely wordless, as we had been. As is the case with all creatures which inhabit the silent land of Shizana, however, their minds were abuzz in communication. An ethereal line of shared thought into which I had momentarily breached as I stared paralyzed, looking over the mass, stone-faced countenance of the locals. Their returned look, suddenly becoming a furious glare, let me know where I stood in their eyes at that moment. We were invaders, and would be treated as such. We were all quite unable to move, until compelled to submit to the will of the Shintak. I watched on from the hilltop as the crew were each led to and then bound amongst the center of those circles, of which would likely be visible from the edge of space in their grand scale, and each man seemed to then merge with the rocks, becoming translucent and monstrously indistinguishable from their former natural appearance. They outwardly seemed almost unaware of the change, as if already dead, and yet they were so clearly and abjectly suffering. The thoughts of the Shintak became uninterpretable beyond a collective din of revelry as I looked upon my fallen friends. I could hear their manic cries of terror tear silently through the windless landscape as their congealed forms began to radiate a pulsing purple luster from within. I might have stood there for centuries, or maybe just an hour or two, but when it was finally all over and the men on the rocks were no longer men and their transformation was complete, sucked into the land entirely, I was summoned to the bottom of the hill. The Shintak joined me there, lined in their strange formation, where in one voice I was thanked for presenting such a bountiful harvest to the immortal kin of Shizana. They offered me what I was in search of: their power, to use as my own, but with a dreadful condition. It was one which I shamefully and remorselessly took up without a second thought. Over 50 years have passed since my return home. I have traveled extensively by boat and rail. My preachings have accumulated a party of followers thrice the size of my former crew, all clamoring to obtain a face as ageless as mine. Utilizing their combined wealth, a new ship awaits us on the docks upon which we will set sail once more for the fabled Shizana steppe. There is little guilt remaining in my soul, if such a thing even remains within me after what I have become. Although, at the end of it all, who could possibly say no to forever? I was working late one night at my office during Christmas time. We had some rush orders due, and I'm the only one at the office without any obligation to family, so they just kind of stuck me with it. I'm complaining too much about it, though, because it gets me some extra money for doing pretty much nothing. I'm trying to get the work done as fast as I can, though, so I can just go home and do even more nothing with my cats. But things just aren't going the way I want them to. The weather keeps knocking out the power, so I keep having to restart my computer every 15 minutes or so. Then without fail, the power goes out again, so I start to walk around the empty office, peeking into people's rooms. Everyone has already gone home for holidays hours ago. I get to the boss's office and start to snoop around his desk. Unlike everyone else in the office, the boss has a giant window to look out of. Looking out the window, I see a figure standing down on the sidewalk next to the bench for the bus stop. Even standing right under the light, they are hardly illuminated by it. I can't make them out clearly, but I can only assume they're a homeless person or something, because there isn't any buses running at this time. I continue to look at them for several minutes, and I notice that the figure does not move at all, so I start to move away from the window, and that's when it happens. The figure finally moves towards the building. This startled me, because I had been watching them for at least 20 minutes, and they hadn't moved a muscle. Then all of a sudden, the figure begins to speed walk toward the building and then switch into a full-on sprint. I turn and run back to my office and grab my stuff and run towards the elevator. But when I got there, the elevator was already coming up. My stomach drops. Who could be coming up right now? I should be the only one in the office right now, right? The elevator gets closer and closer, and I still have no idea who or what is about to get off. The number hits my floor and my heart sinks. The doors slowly open and I brace myself for anything but it's empty. But how is that possible? Because someone had to have pushed the button specifically to get to this floor. But no one was there, so I got on the elevator and took it all the way down. Once I get to the bottom floor, I look around to see if I can see that figure, but they have disappeared. I walked out the door to the spot where I initially saw the figure standing. The spot under the light next to the bench where the figure was standing was a noticeable difference in temperature. I looked up to the office window where I was standing when I first saw it, and right there in the window was a dark figure looking right down at me. I was awestruck by the sight of it. How is that possible? How did this person sneak by me so easily? Who could be in the office right now? I was the only one there that night. It didn't make any sense. I start to walk back to the office building, but I notice the figure doesn't move, so I start to run to see if I can catch whoever is in there. I run to the elevator and hit the button to go up to my floor, but it's taking a long time to come down. After what feels like an eternity, it eventually does get there. I get on and I hit the number for my floor. But just before the doors closed, I noticed that I dropped my key card to get into the actual office on the floor. So I stepped off and the doors closed behind me and the elevator went up. Not wanting to waste any more time, I take the stairs. Once I get to my floor, I run to my boss's office and there is no one there, but there is a noticeable difference in temperature there. I look out to the street and right there under the light next to the bench is the figure again. How is this happening? I decide maybe these late nights are finally catching up to me and maybe it's time to go home. I have no idea what is going on now. How was I not able to see this person pass by me? Was it even a person? The streetlight then begins to flicker and turn off. It turns back on after a few seconds and the figure is gone. That was the final straw. I walk into my office and pack up my things and leave for the night. When I get home, I can feel like there is some sort of a presence there, a kind of heaviness. Walking inside, I try to turn the hall lights on, but nothing happens. I can see the light is still on the stove, so the power isn't out. I walk into the kitchen and try to turn that light on, but nothing happens as well. That's when I can hear some sounds start coming from my bedroom. I walk over to my door and grab the handle, and it is freezing cold. I try to open the door, but it doesn't budge. I let go of the handle and go to push on the door, but it opens slowly on its own. Standing right on the other side is the figure. I can't make out who they are, though, as they are so cloaked in shadow. I can't make out any features. The figure takes a step towards me and reaches out before disappearing. As soon as it does, all of the lights in my house turn back on. I can't explain what just happened to me, if it's my sleep-deprived, overworked brain or something a little more, but all I can say is that it really freaked me out. If anyone knows what that was, then I would love feedback. I've heard of shadow people before, but this seemed a little more sinister. Echoes of desolation. As I walked the labyrinthine suburban streets, rain rhythmically pattered atop my crude scrap metal armor. A burning, chill breeze flowing through the gaps in my helmet, numbing my nose and cheeks. The sound of a handcrafted longsword tapped against my armor in the breeze. A young man appeared before me. I stopped, staring at the man. I said nothing. He said nothing. The man stood eerily still. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. I continued to walk along the roads in silence, the weight of his presence lingering in my mind. The rows of houses stretched out before me, their once vibrant colors faded and lifeless. They echoed with a sense of abandonment. Eventually, I heard the haunting noises I had been searching for. The familiar groaning and rasping emanated from one of the long, empty homes. No cars lined the driveway, no lights flickered in the windows. Just the labored breathing and screeching from within, piercing the silence. As I approached the barely open front door, my hand instinctively gripped the hilt of my longsword. I pushed the rest of the door open and stepped inside, my armor dripping water across the tile floor. There was a lounge room to my right. As expected, there was nothing of value. The place had already been scavenged. I continued down the main hallway. As the groaning grew louder, I started to panic, but only for a second. Fear is useful. Panic is not. I saw the source of the noise, a creature that used to be human, but was now just a hollow husk of its former self. Its limbs were large and disproportionate, and its fingers were freakishly long, culminating in sharp, jagged claws. I took a step into the large empty back half of the house, my armor making a metallic clank with each step. The creature knew I was there. It quickly turned around and ran at me. I threw my left arm up as it slammed against me, savagely clawing and scratching at the armor. As I attempted to hold the creature back, I slammed the hilt of my sword into its gut, pushing it back a few feet, then swung with my blade, landing a deep strike within the creature's flesh. It ran at me again, impaling itself further on my sword. I ripped to the side, taking a large chunk out of the abomination, throwing it to the floor. It scrambled to its feet and jumped at me before I could swing again, knocking me to the floor. it fell on top of me and started tearing pieces of scrap off my armor. Using all my strength and adrenaline, I slammed my metal gauntlet into the side of the creature's face, shoving it onto the floor beside me before using my blade to impale it through the chest, nailing it in place. I quickly got up and, using all my strength, lifted my boot and slammed it into the creature's head. It roared as I slammed my boot again and again. After the adrenaline wore off, I saw that the creature's head was all but mush beneath me. I stood over the fallen creature, panting. As I looked up, I saw the young man again, right in front of me. As I looked at the young man, I felt my stomach turning and a lump forming in my throat. "Please, am I done?" I whispered. The young man remained silent, his eyes conveying an unspoken understanding. Then, in the blink of an eye, he vanished again, leaving me frozen, grappling with my own thoughts. I searched the house for anything that could be used to set up some form of camp, but there was nothing. There was always nothing. With a heavy heart, I dragged the lifeless abomination to the front door and cast it outside. I walked down the hallway to the large back room, removed my helmet, and laid my head down on the cold tiles. All I heard was the rain pattering on the roof as I closed my eyes. As I drifted into a fitful slumber, the weight of exhaustion and guilt pulled me deeper into a realm of twisted visions. The transition from the real world was seamless, as if the darkness that enveloped the house had seeped into my subconscious. The once familiar suburban streets transformed into a labyrinth of eerie shadows and writhing tendrils. The rain that had tapped gently on my armor now turned into a torrential downpour, obscuring my vision and making every step a struggle against the deluge. As I navigated the drenched maze, the distorted echoes of my footsteps merged with unsettling whispers that seemed to emanate from the very world around me. The houses, once faded and abandoned, now loomed over me like towering monoliths of decay and despair. I pushed open the door of one of these grotesque structures. Inside, the rooms twisted and contorted, the walls pulsating with a sickly energy. Shadows danced across the walls, forming grotesque shapes. From the darkest corner of a room, a horde of abominations emerged. Their forms shifted and morphed, a grotesque mess of human and monstrous features. The air grew thick with their putrid stench as they closed in, their eyes gleaming with an insatiable hunger. Panic surged through me. I swung my sword, but it passed through the abominations as if they were mere illusions. They laughed at my futile attempts, their chilling chuckles echoing through the distorted halls. The creatures lunged at me, their elongated limbs reaching for my flesh. I fought back, my strikes met with resistance, but my blows seemed to have no effect. The creatures knocked me to the floor and began tearing chunks of flesh from my bones. I screamed and cried with desperation, knowing that no one was left to help me. The young man appeared, standing over me. The creatures all stopped and looked up at the man. Please, I choked out, my voice a mere whisper amidst the chaos. "Help me, I'm sorry." Without saying anything, he turned his back and started to leave. My eyes shot open, adrenaline racing through my veins. I jumped to my feet, my legs shaking and my stomach burning. My eyes darted around the dark, empty house. The familiar rain had ceased. My breathing was labored and quick, eventually slowing down. I fell back and caught myself against a wall. I slowly slid down until I was sitting against it. With tears in my eyes, I put my head in my hands and screamed desperately with sorrow and rage until the taste of blood snapped me back to reality. Hours passed as I sat there, tears staining my cheeks, until the early morning sunlight provided me enough motivation to move. I rose from the floor, donned my helmet, and left the house, stepping back onto the empty roads. The smell of petrichor and the chill wind hitting my face. I continued to walk the empty streets, my footsteps echoing through the desolation. I kept walking along the roads and pathways, listening, but hearing nothing but the sound of metal on pavement and my breathing inside my helmet. As the sun began its descent below the horizon, casting an eerie glow across the desolate landscape, a shiver ran down my spine. The biting chill of the first night breeze brushed against my face, a haunting reminder that I needed to seek shelter. It didn't matter where. Approaching the nearest house, I fixed my gaze upon the handle of the front door, a glimmer of hope flickering within me. "Come on," I whispered to myself, a plea to the inanimate object. I attempted to turn the door handle, but as expected, it remained steadfast. I don't know why I tried the handles anymore. A wave of frustration washed over me, fueled by my ever-growing fatigue. Taking a step back, I unleashed my pent-up aggression, channeling it into a forceful kick that collided with the door. The wood buckled under the impact, yielding to my relentless assault, and swung open, crashing against the wall with a thunderous bang. Stepping inside, I found myself surrounded by darkness. The remnants of what was once a home were dimly visible in the faint light that managed to penetrate the gloom. Most of the furniture had been stripped away, leaving behind only ghosts of life that once inhabited this space. What remained was shrouded in a thick layer of dust. To my left, a lounge room stood empty, devoid of any signs of comfort or solace, and to my right was a door that led into a bedroom with an ensuite. There was no mattress, just an old bed frame. I walked into the ensuite and beheld my appearance in the mirror. It had been so long since I'd seen myself in a mirror. It never crossed my mind. I looked so alone. My full suit of twisted scrap covered my body, my second skin. I caught a glimpse of my eyes through my helmet and slowly removed it, dropping it on the floor beside me, making a loud clang as it hit the tiles. I gazed at my face for the first time in months, maybe years. It was filthy. I was filthy, unshaven, my dark brown hair thick and knotted. And my eyes. God, my eyes. I stared into my own eyes. I had forgotten what they looked like, brown or hazel. I had big black bags under my eyes, and they seemed to have sunken into my skull. They looked so tired. But looking through the tiredness and the guilt, they blazed with a ferocious mixture of hatred, rage, and disdain for the abominations that roamed this world. I grabbed my helmet off the floor and held it by my side as I stared at what I had become. As night descended, I sought refuge in the bedroom, collapsing onto the carpeted floor. I positioned myself in the corner, unable to escape the lingering dread that accompanied the darkness. Hours ticked by, each passing moment weighed down by anticipation and fear. I sat there, my gaze lost in the abyss of shadows until my weary body succumbed to exhaustion, forcing my eyes shut. The twisted streets, the broken house, the grotesque abominations, the young man. I jolted awake, covered in a cold sweat. Quickly, I jumped to my feet and backed up further into the corner, frantically scanning the room. Once again, the room was empty. The same nightmare every night, every single night. The sun was barely peeking above the horizon as I stepped out of the house. I could have watched the sun rise. I should have watched the sun rise. I resumed my endless journey along the roads, walking along the streets, searching. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a harsh light over the desolate streets, I heard the all too familiar groaning and screeching in the distance. Instinctively, I turned towards the source, my heart sinking as I witnessed a group of abominations pursuing a lone survivor. The survivor sprinted desperately, seeking refuge in a nearby house. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards the scene, fueled by hatred. As I approached the house, I could hear the creatures smashing against the windows and doors, their hunger-fueled frenzy palpable in the air. I could wait. Wait for them to devour their prey. Wait for them to extinguish the flame of this survivor. Then, as they lay dormant, sneak up and slaughter them, one at a time, ending a whole horde of these abominations, or as many as I could before the others wake, maybe 2 or 3. I heard the petrified scream of the survivor begging the abominations, pleading with creatures who are no more capable of understanding than a rabid dog, screeching at them out of desperation, "I can't do it." The screams, "I can't." And then, just as I was about to step inside, the young man appeared before me once more. His presence stirred a mix of guilt and regret. "I'm sorry," I whispered, as a lump formed in my throat. "I understand now. I know you will never forgive me, but let me try. Please." The young man looked at me. Then for the first time he spoke. His voice was deep and damaged. "Don't be sorry. Be better." He looked at me with a sense of pride, and with that he stepped aside and vanished. And for the first time in a long time, I made my choice, the right choice. With a deep breath, I unsheathed my blade and let it drag against the tiles, creating a harsh scraping sound that echoed through the empty house. The abominations turned their attention towards me, drawn by the promise of fresh prey. The lone survivor seized the chance to escape while I stood my ground, facing overwhelming odds. The abominations closed in on me, their grotesque forms lunging and slashing with relentless fury. I swung my blade with all my might, the steel cutting through the air in swift arcs. In a desperate bid to buy the survivor precious moments of freedom, I parried the abomination's clawed strikes with a sense of urgency. Each impact reverberated through my body. Their relentless assault didn't waver. My once sturdy armor groaned under the ceaseless blows, and I felt it dent and weaken with each attack. Sweat streamed down my face as my muscles ached and my lungs burned. The blows seemed unending. Then, without warning, searing pain flared in my left shoulder, and I cried out in agony. The echo of my groan filled the empty house as my armor shattered, stripped away by the relentless assault. My arm went limp, blood gushing from the wound. The abominations pressed their advantage, tearing chunks of flesh from my bones with a frenzied hunger. Summoning my last ounce of strength, I mustered a final, desperate strike. My blade plunged deep into the muscular neck of an abomination, severing its spinal cord and crippling it. As life ebbed away, pain and weariness gave way to a sense of peace. I had fulfilled my purpose. I had slaughtered as many of the abominations as I could find. Butchering these creatures fueled by a searing white-hot rage, punishing them for their very existence. But none of that mattered now. In my final moments, my gaze fixed on the lone survivor who was steadily vanishing into the distance, their silhouette blending with the desolate landscape. Through the haze of pain, a surge of hope welled up within me, hope that, if I had encountered someone in this ravaged world, perhaps this survivor could unite with others. And so, with a serene smile, I closed my eyes, welcoming the eternal slumber. In death, I discovered tranquility, secure in the knowledge that my actions, against all odds, had set in motion the potential for a brighter future. someone else would witness the next sunrise. My only wish was that they relish it.